Each morning, 4 or 5 times a week, one of the first things I do is feed my starter for the day's sourdough making. This video follows the life of my sourdough starter over a 24-hour period, which actually began yesterday afternoon. Please follow along on a day in the life of my sourdough starter. Hi, I'm Ron. Thanks for clicking on this sourdough starter video. If you're new here, please click on the subscribe button and be sure to check out my other videos. On my YouTube channel, I demonstrate using ordinary ingredients to make extraordinary food. In today's video, we'll be using flour and water and a pinch of salt. Let's begin. Yesterday, after removing 200 grams of starter from this jar for bread making, I scraped down the sides of my sourdough starter jar and left it out on my kitchen counter overnight. I like to leave about 50 grams of unused starter in the jar for the next day's feeding. With a loose-fitting lid, this is where the starter sits for 10 to 12 hours until feeding in the following morning. It's now the morning after and time to feed the starter. My sourdough bread recipe is 70% hydration, consisting of 200 grams of starter, 900 grams of flour, 600 grams of water, and 20 grams of salt. Here I'm adding 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water, bringing this total sourdough starter weight in the jar to around 250 grams. I use a piece of tape on the jar to measure the increase in volume, and I place the jar in a proofing box with a temperature set at 80 degrees. The starter should double in volume in about 4 hours. Shown here is bottled water, but actually I have long since used the original water, and now I simply refill the container with filtered water from the spigot in my fridge door. The mixing flour I use is a combination of 1/3 all-purpose flour, 1/3 rye flour, and 1/3 freshly ground flour that I mill myself from wheat berries. I usually make sourdough Monday through Thursday, and since today is Thursday, after today and after removing 200 grams for today's sourdough recipe, I'll take the leftover 50 grams or so still in this jar and put it in a clean jar for next week's feeding and baking. Into the proofing box the starter goes until it has doubled in volume, which should take about 4 hours. It's been nearly 4 hours since the starter was put in the proofing box, and it's time to get the dough ready. I'm going to mix 900 grams of flour with 600 grams of water. This is called autolyse. After combining the two, I'll let them hydrate for 30 minutes before adding 200 grams of starter and 20 grams of salt. I finished mixing the dough off camera and I let it rest for 30 minutes. It's now time to mix in 200 grams of starter from our starter jar and 20 grams of salt, which will leave approximately 50 grams of starter still in the mixing jar. After mixing in the starter and salt, the dough will go through a series of stretch and folds during bulk fermentation, which usually lasts about 4 to 5 hours, or until the dough has increased in volume by 25 to 30%. After bulk fermentation, the dough is divided into 2 loaves, placed in baskets, covered, placed in the fridge for 1 to 3 days, then removed from the fridge and baked. Here are 2 loaves of Artisan sourdough bread that have been baked in a Dutch oven with the lid on. They now need to go back in the oven for 15 minutes with the lid off to finish baking. I am simply amazed that such nutritious and wonderfully flavorful bread is made from just flour, water, and a pinch of salt. And so this concludes a day in the life of sourdough starter. We're back where we started 24 hours ago, with approximately 50 grams of leftover starter in the jar, waiting to be fed 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water, and added to 900 grams of flour, 600 grams of water, and 20 grams of salt to make 2 more loaves of sourdough bread. Thanks for watching, and please click the subscribe button.